ladies and gentlemen. Welcome today at Harmon Center. I'm very delighted to have with me two great and wonderful speakers, experts on regional relations and regional dynamics and international relations. Our seminar today will last for 1 hour. About 1 hour, and the style of it will be more of a Q&A questions. I will have set of groups of questions that will more or less benefits from the expertise of our two speakers. So the title of our seminar today is Regional Rivalry and its impact on the Syrian conflict. I will introduce first my two guests today, Christopher Phillips and Bilgehan Ozturk. Christopher is professor of International Relations at Queen Mary, University of London. He is author of 4 books, including The Battle for Syria, International Rivalry in the Middle East, published by Yale University Press, and the forthcoming Battleground, 10 Conflicts that Explain the New Middle East. He regularly consults UK and foreign governments, agencies, private companies and NGOs, and has appeared on the BBC, Al Jazeera, Sky News, Bloomberg and Channel 4 News. Dr. Bilgehan Ozturk is a foreign policy researcher recognized for his expertise in Turkish foreign and security policies with a specific focus on the Middle East and North Africa region. His diverse research portfolio encompasses areas such as non-state armed actors, civil conflicts, countering violent extremism, and Turkish-Russian relations and the dynamics of great power rivalry. Welcome. I'm so delighted and honored at Harmon Center to have you both with us today. So I will start with the more of the style that we have today is dividing or more or less organizing the session into 3 groups of questions. I will start, as you know, what started as peaceful demonstration in 2011 that rapidly escalated into a large-scale, complex and multidimensional war. Over a period of 12 years, the violence spread and became more intense. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed and the economic infrastructure and civic life of the region were devastated. Of course, there has been as a result, fragmentation of Syrian territory, which was accompanied by the large-scale internal and external displacement of the Syrian populations. As I'm having today 2 great academics with me, as you know, the scholarship has always been divided between, or to some extent before the intrusion of interdisciplinarity in the field, that we have always scholars who kind of focused on the internal dynamics, focusing on the micro-analysis of the events, like what caused the instigation of violence in Syria, focusing on identity, sectarianism, more or less the entrenched authoritarian regime that we had rolled by Assad, and then other scholars that more focus on the regional and the international rivalry. So there has also been lots of talk about authoritarian exceptionalism in Syria, and you know many authors like Hinnebusch and also Heidman have talked a lot about the exceptionalism of the entrenched authoritarianism in Syria for the last 12 years or the last 6 decades. What I'm really interested in today, that more, or if I can call it, I'm not an IR scholar, just to say, I'm more focusing on domestic politics, but to what extent maybe we can call it the exceptionalism of the multipolarity that we have it today and that have shaped the Syrian conflict or the course of the Syrian conflict. This actually leads me to the first set of questions where I want to talk or ask about the relation or the link between the duration of war and the multipolar system that we have. So I will start with Chris. Actually, Chris, one of the intractable debates in the study of international conflicts is the linkage, as I said, between the magnitude of the intrastate warfare and the polarity or multipolarity. Why can polarity be associated with war duration? What's the link? Like, just tell us about if we have a unipolar order, would we have a less years in the Syrian conflict?
Yeah. Sorry, can everyone hear me okay? That's wonderful. Firstly, a huge thanks to Harmon for inviting me. It's a real honour to speak to people about this subject matter. And thanks, Rahaf, for that question. To give a bit of context why I look at this topic, and particularly sort of the question that Rahaf's asking, as Rahaf mentioned, I wrote a book actually came out in 2016 called The Battle for Syria, International Rivalry in the New Middle East. It was based on field research I'd been doing from around the time the Syria conflict began in 2011. And at that time, people might recall, most of the scholarship, most of the analysis was very much focused on the internal dynamics inside Syria. It was all about, opposition groups, the Free Syria Army, internal fractures within them, what was going on with what the regime was doing, whether or not, there might be an internal coup launched against Assad. So there's a lot of kind of, Kremlinology about what's happening inside the regime itself. Though a lot of the scholarship was particularly focused on the opposition and who might take over if Assad were to fall. And at that time, not many people were talking about the international dynamics, which is strange to think of now, because today we very much see it as an internationalized civil war. You think about the dynamics on the ground now. You have a Syria that's divided, the regime-controlled area, which is heavily propped up by Iran and Russia. You have the north of Syria, which is rebel-controlled but heavily supported by Turkey. And, of course, you've got eastern Syria, controlled by the Syrian Democratic Forces, dominated by the Kurdish-led PYD, supported by the United States. So you have all these international actors inside Syria on the ground now. But in those early days, people weren't talking about that. The argument that I made in my book was actually that you can't divorce the two. You can't actually see this as a domestic conflict that then sucks in those external actors, even though that's what it looks like on the ground. Actually, the opposite. It's from the very beginning of the conflict, those internal actors were looking to the outside in order to determine effectively how far they'd go. How much would they fight? It's really interesting. You look at the regime behavior very early on, how they behave in what you talked about, an uprising or protests that are crushed violently. And the way that the regime behaved, it wasn't to do what Muammar Gaddafi did, for example, in Libya, which is send in all the troops straight away, crush the protests as fast as you can. It wasn't. It was incremental. It was, at first, we're going to use the police. And then when that doesn't work, we're going to start using the army. And when the army doesn't work, we're going to start using the tanks. And when the tanks doesn't work, we're going to start using the air force. And when that doesn't work, we're going to start using the Scud missiles. And then we're going to start using chemical weapons. But they didn't use all of those in one go, because they were looking to the outside world to see how they'd react. And on top of that, they were getting a lot of suggestions, feedback, support from their key external allies, Russia and Iran. And we've got lots of documentation that came out really early on with, for example, Iran sending over, as early as April and May 2011, sending over advisors to help with counter the protests, experts on social media, for example, to sort of challenge the narratives that the opposition were putting forward there. And then as time went on, that included people that were specialists in crowd control, and then it became specialists on actually fighting a war. People like Qasem Soleimani, who were sent over from the Quds force. So, and this was all in the very first year of the conflict, all in 2011. And likewise, when the opposition began to form into rebel groups, nominally known as the Free Syria Army and other sort of militia, which you guys are much more experts on than I am, as we were talking about earlier, very early on they're talking to outsiders, saying, will you come and if we militarize, if we take territory, will you come and help us? Will you firstly send us weapons? Will you send us money? And then very quickly it becomes about, can we persuade the United States to intervene, like they did in Libya, to create a no-fly zone? So from very early on, internal actors are looking to outsiders. That's not to say for a moment that they are acting on behalf of outsiders. It is not a question that Iran is saying to Assad, jump, and Assad is saying how high. He is an independent actor pursuing his own policies, but he is, and this is where the IR comes in, his choices of actions are framed and contained by his external allies. And the same goes for the rebel actors as well. They are looking at what the external actors do. And that, to bring it full circle, is why the external dynamics greatly affect, for example, the length of the war.
Yeah, okay.
Because in conflict studies, if you just have two domestic actors that are not influenced by external players, pretty soon one side runs out of weapons, or one side runs out of weapons and guns and ammunition, and that side wins.
Yeah.
You know, so the other side wins. If you have external actors pouring in money and weapons and guns and possibly, like, you know, even occupying part of the territory which acts as a buffer zone or a safe space, then you can continue the war.
And this what brings me to asymmetric conflict.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what we are having in Syria. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just make one final point, sorry, Rahaf, which is, of course, the more actors you have, the more external actors, the longer that supply of weapons and guns can continue. So, as you said, it's a unipolar world where only the United States is really powerful. That's the only one doing any of the acting. In the multipolar world we live in now, you have all these regional and international powers all offering weapons, money, guns, support, allows wars to go on for longer.
Actually, Chris, you have just asked a question that I was supposed to ask it to Bilgehan about the hypothesis behind that. We have a hypothesis, as Chris said, in conflict studies, that an increase in the number of balls in the state system is associated with longer wars than average. Now, I read something in some journal articles about, and also I was at when we were together in London when we had that CBAT conference. I can't forget that comments on getting back Iran's hegemony and the U.S. hegemony, and that was really a real debate at that time. That if we have the U.S. hegemony back, like going back to a unipolar system, then that would lead to less conflict in the world and perhaps more of balancing. What do you think of that?
Well, this is a long debate. Again, let me start with thanking Harmon. It's a pleasure to be speaking along with Rahaf and Christopher Phillips. And I also want to thank the audience for showing up to this extent at this time. So, again, it's a long debate whether unipolarity helps create a more stable environment, internationally speaking. But we all know that even after 1990, where when the Cold War ended, the United States has been the only victor of the Cold War. It was the hegemon. There was no challenger to that hegemon in the system. But still, we did have conflicts here and there, didn't we? So it is debatable whether unipolarity is much more stable when it comes to its impact on conflicts, eruption, different parts of the world. But of course, multipolarity makes it much worse, because you increase the number of intervening powers, and they have different calculations, and even they update on the way of, you know, on the process of intervening. Their conduct is subject to change and updates. That, for example, happened in the case of Turkey, which I'm really familiar with. Although Turkey was not a very experienced actor to intervene in an extraterritorial conflict, extraterritorial environment, even that had to update its strategy, its methods, so on and so forth. But this goes even for the very well experienced actors like the United States who intervene, who has a long experience in intervening, even probably for United Kingdom and other countries. For that reason, I don't think we can have a clear answer whether unipolarity is much more promising when it comes to lessening the duration of conflict, just because we have seen other conflicts too. But
perhaps here where the other scholars comes from, analyzing having the micro analysis on violent behavior and the people nature.
What I was more interested in is that proposition from certain scholars. If the hegemony comes back. Well, maybe it's not our topic to discuss within this let's say discussion, but I think there will not be a return of hegemony. For I don't know if we have time to discuss this, but I have.
I'd love to discuss it. I could jump into it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this actually leads me to something like, because most of the scholars also have taken a realist analysis of the external dynamics and its interaction with the domestic dynamics as well when it comes to the Syrian conflicts. And this brings me to Turkey's position, and these questions can be answered by like both of you. Like, to what extent, like from a realist point of view, that how can we explain Turkey's that acted in its vital interest, but it remains unclear why it's allowed, in terms of Syria as a state, to become so weakened.
I'm going to look at Hannah's that first.
Okay.
I want an opening from you.
Okay. It's very so. Turkey's approach to Syria. I think one thing we can clearly say is that Turkey's policy towards the Syria conflict goes through two phases. It goes through the sort of 2011 to 2015-16 phase, and then the post-2016 phase. So from 2011 to 2015-16, Turkey makes a very conscious decision when the Syrian uprising begins to turn on Assad and to back the opposition. Now remember, actually prior to then, we're in the era of zero problems with neighbors. Actually, Syria is like the poster child of Turkey's re-engagement with the Middle East. You know, Assad and Erdogan go on holiday together. Like, there is this big kind of, I remember I was living in Aleppo at the time, and there was lots of Turkish tourists coming over to Aleppo a lot, and vice versa, going over to Antab and elsewhere. So there was very close relations, and that all ended because Turkey made a conscious decision when the uprising began to turn on Assad and back the opposition. Now, why they did that, again, is a debate between what we'd call realists and constructivists. The realists would say that they're making a calculated risk that actually the way the Arab Spring is going, it's inevitable that Assad will fall. They want to be on the right side of history. They want to get in early with what will inevitably be a post-Assad government. And given that Syria is right on their doorstep, that makes sense from a strategic perspective. And when Assad doesn't go as quickly as they expect, then it also therefore makes sense to keep supporting the rebels, give them weapons and money and strategic support, and try to get other people like the United States to join in that fight to hurry that along for, again, that strategic reason. The constructivist argument, which is a kind of more ideological or identity-driven idea, is the idea that actually leading figures like Ahmet Davutoglu, who's originally foreign minister, then becomes prime minister of Turkey, are driven by either an ideological sympathy to the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamism, and because leading actors in both Syria but also the wider Arab world, places like Egypt, they seem to be on the ascendancy. There's a kind of an ideological solidarity with them, and that's why they would support the opposition more than they'd support Assad. Another way of looking at it is this idea of neo-Ottomanism, the idea that actually because Syria was historically part of the Ottoman Empire, the ideological leanings of the AKP and Davutoglu to sort of try to relive that Ottoman ideology, again pushes them towards a more aggressive position in Syria. So that's the kind of, and we can debate that. Is it a security focus, or is it an ideology or identity-driven policy? Again, I was going to say, but then what clearly happens in 2015-16 is that policy has failed, it doesn't work, and the security threat that comes over from the Syria conflict in the form of ISIS and Kurdish militants means they ditch basically most support for the opposition and go for a far more hard-headed security focus.
Thank you. I would definitely agree with the periodization of the Turkey's policy. I agree that 2015 and 16 is a turning point, a watershed moment. Up until that, the policy is driven by humanitarian and much more of a liberal outlook to look at the Syrian uprising, and even when it turned into a conflict, it was about hosting refugees, fleeing Syria, being the humanitarian voice of the conflict. But at the same time, when we address the question why Turkey intervened or made this decision, actually to set a record, I think for the decision makers in Ankara, actually it has taken rather a long time to let's say decide to support the opposition in Syria. And this was due to a variety of reasons, but it was a way of thinking and reading of the events. It was like a domino effect theory, and it was a historic moment. Turkey was already on the way of, let's say, thriving in its foreign policy. It was doing really good in terms of that zero problems with neighbors. And even when the uprisings happened in Egypt and Tunisia, they had to make a choice. Are you with the losers, so then quote unquote, or are you with the future forces? And in some way, the decision makers in Ankara calculated that whoever comes to power, as a result of these uprisings, Turkey already had, let's say, cordial relations with all these countries and governments and at that time, but they calculated that there is a limit to have flourishing cordial relations with this government, but what will come into power as a result of these uprisings, we will have much better relations. And to back that point, I remember Ashraf Mishraf, he works on political economy, and when I was an MA student, and he did a study and saying that in 2012, he said, these are the numbers, these are the trade data between countries who experienced Arab uprisings, and these are the trade volumes between Turkey and these countries that underwent the uprisings. And he said, by far, Turkey is the biggest winner of this, as a result of these uprisings and new.
So it was a calculated decision.
I'm not
Strategic,
Well, that was the thinking, and at a certain point they had to decide who, they were under pressure. And I remember in Turkey, for example, when it comes to Syria, it was a much more difficult decision than towards Egypt, than towards Tunisia, because they had already, let's say, developed even a strategic relationship invested in Assad, and as you mentioned, the holidays together. He was calling him brother Bashar, and now for a decade, Erdogan is being castigated by opposition within Turkey. What kind of
come to the narrative.
What kind of a shift like this? You call them, Kardeşim, brother Bashar, and then you turn very swiftly into butcher Assad. So
I will come to the narrative.
Can I just jump on one point there?
Okay.
There's just
1 minute, Chris.
The point on Erdogan is that, like, the personality side of things is really important as well. Like Erdogan feels, betrayed is the best word. He feels, over the summer of 2011, Davutoglu is going back and forth through Ankara and Damascus over and over again, and Bashar is saying to him, "Oh yeah, we'll do that. We'll pull our tanks out of Hama." And Davutoglu is going back to Erdogan and saying, "Yeah, he's going to do it. You've got this close relationship," and then he doesn't do it. And by the end, this happens about 4 times. And by the end, Turkey feels so betrayed because they've invested in this personal relationship. That's why sort of the language shifts so much. Is that I think there's actually that personal side is important as well.
I'm coming. I'm coming to this. Exactly.
Just one sentence.
Okay.
Just one sentence. To add to that personal side, I think I'm coming from a more structuralist orientation when it comes to reading dynamics, but I believe personalities indeed matter, and Ahmet Davutoglu's impact is really obvious. He, as a person, has a much more of a categorized vision of things, view of things. So he was the one who did the last and final negotiation with Bashar. It took hours. They say it's like 10 hours. And when he came back, that was a decision. Khalas, you know,
Okay.
we have nothing to do with Assad again. I'm not sure whether a fully fledged politician like Erdogan,
Yeah.
who
yeah,
has
which done that.
flexibility in his behavior, would do the same. I have doubts.
Okay. Now,
Don't give
actually,
academics
this
power.
like kind of is the way for me to the second group of questions that more of focus on the interplay between the macro, meso, and the micro in a way that reflects. And I will start with the Chris book. Like I know that you've mentioned a little bit about the first. Version of 2016, then there was an updated version, and then now today we are in 2023. And I know in your book, and I reviewed it once, to what extent do you think there has been a change in terms of the external actors' positions between 2016 and to 2020 and today? How can you define that shift? This brings me also to have more of a discussion as well on the interaction between the macro, and the micro in Syria. And I know, because I'm asking this because you wrote about the sectarianism as plan B in Syria.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay.
That's a big question. How long do I have? So there's two questions there. There's one about the sort of the external actors and their changing positions, and the other's about the macro and the micro. I'll do the external actors first of all. Again, I feel like I'm just trying to sell my book here, and I'm not. But the front cover of my book is a map of Syria with all these hands going in, and the hands all have different flags representing the different countries that were involved. And the idea was to show that actually there were certain key actors that played a really important role. So you had Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, the United States. I also put Israel on there, but I don't really think that they're not. It's really those six early on. 2016 as this tipping point. I mean, really, it's 2015. It's the intervention of Russia that changed. 2016 in Turkey is relevant, but that's basically just the delayed effect. The power shift that's occurred is Russia's direct intervention into the conflict, which changes a lot of actors' calculations. Qatar, by that point, which was a really heavy supporter of the opposition early on, because of developments elsewhere, particularly in Egypt, and also its deteriorating relations with fellow Gulf states, it has effectively stepped back from Syria at that point. Saudi Arabia, because of 2015, two things happen. Russia intervened in Syria, making it realise the game's up, we can't compete, but also it intervenes directly in Yemen at that point, and its attention gets focused over there. Which means you have the remaining actors, which I think still are the sort of four key external actors in Syria, which are the US, Turkey, Russia, and Iran. And I think actually the position that they take in 2016 remains their position today, which is Russia and Iran completely committed to the continuation of the Assad regime. I don't want to say whatever it takes, but to quite an extent, to the point that they've committed a lot of resources. In the Iranian case, they've actually lost quite a lot of blood and treasure. It's not been an easy conflict at all for Iran, and they're committed to staying there as long as they can. The United States position has shifted a tiny bit, because initially their own real interest in Syria, after they decided that the Assad regime, toppling the Assad regime was not really something they were willing to directly commit to, has been to defeat ISIS. ISIS has been defeated, and now they've still got a presence in eastern Syria, but primarily that is to prevent ISIS from returning, but also to keep Iran out, to make sure that Iran doesn't
Balancing?
Sorry. Well, yeah, to a degree of balancing. They're worried that if Iran gets access to the quick route overland through Iraq, through Deir ez-Zor, and then down into Damascus, that will act as a tighter overland supply route to Hezbollah, and to a lesser extent to Assad. So they basically want to keep that area in the east to stop, Iran from getting access to that. And then Turkey, which again, might be discussed. We've discussed a fair bit anyway, but they have a sort of strategic interest in effectively preventing the collapse of the remaining rebel-held and Syrian National Army areas in the north, because they're worried about more refugees coming in, because they're worried about that having a massive security impact on Turkey. So you know, but they're no longer seemingly interested in toppling Assad.
Okay.
So that's what shifted in 2016, sorry. We can talk about macro-micro later, maybe, because I think I'm conscious.
No, I mean, because I'm going to ask Bilgehan about the narrative again, because, you know, you've mentioned just a little while ago about, in terms, is there now, because you said something about Erdogan's narrative at the beginning of the conflict, where it was more about holding a brotherly move discourse towards Syrians, that we are like Muhajir, Ansari, binaries, or more of an image, a perspective, focusing on that. But then we witnessed in the last years a change of the internal discourse, the official Turkish discourse. And I wonder that, as you know, like we know as scholars, we think of what these internal narratives aim at. What are the three things? Sovereignty, legitimacy, popularity. And I do wonder why you think there has been a shift in the official Turkish discourse in the last few years, and especially in the last 2 years. And this shift has become a more of a reconciliated with the international, Turkish foreign policy. So for one time now, when I see the Turkish foreign policies, what they are doing, what their aims, objectives, their strategic foreign policy towards the Syrian conflict, and when I analyze the internal discourse, the official discourse, I see a reconciliation. Why is that, you think, Bilgehan?
Reconciliation of foreign policy discourse with the internal?
With the internal discourse.
One. Okay. To do justice, a lot has happened from the points where Erdogan addressed this issue as Muhajir and Ansar, welcoming of refugees. Basically, the greatest, let's say, the greatest difference from now and that time is economy. I don't want to be oversimplistic, but where there was a time when Erdogan was quite comfortably bragging about spending $4 billion or 4 billion Turkish liras for the Syrian crisis, or helping Syrians. And it wasn't an issue to brag about this to your constituency, because the constituency didn't care. They were also sharing his constituency out of their political view, out of their, let's say, ideological view, maybe more conservative and Islamic constituencies. They were sympathizing with the Syrian revolution. Of course, and also the majority of the NGOs who were helping the refugees, Syrians, were also predominantly religiously motivated NGOs. And at that time, when the economy was good, people were still, raising their level of welfare. It wasn't an issue. And politically speaking, politically speaking, Erdogan was unrivaled. He was winning elections even that time, despite whatever is happening in Syria. He was winning all elections very comfortably. The last elections you observed here was the only election in the past 2 decades where he actually feared losing. And I believe that was to a great extent the economy's impact. And I saw a huge shift from Erdogan's political base, by the way. Among all political parties, among all political bases in Turkey, AK Party, Erdogan's party, has been the most welcoming towards Syrian refugees. Out of ideology, out of brotherhood, view towards Syrians. We are sharing the same history, we're sharing the same culture, we're sharing the same religion, so on and so forth. It was a brotherly outlook. There was a radical change. The anti-refugee, anti-Syrian sentiment is widespread across the spectrum of the political parties. Of course, basically, opposition parties have been the flag bearer of the sentiments, and Erdogan saw that, they actually appealed to certain segments of society, and then we have someone like Ümit Özdağ, who is feeding on, let's say, cursing Syrians, and he is appealing certain votes. And in a system like for the past decade, Turkey changed the constitutional system.
Yeah.
It changed from a parliamentary system to presidential system, where you have 1 plus 50% votes to be elected, and even 1% of the votes have been quite consequential. So these are all the calculations that Erdogan had to take into account, and that's why in the latest elections, in the run-up to the elections, you saw him quite conflictual in terms of his discourse. On the one hand, he said, we will never turn up our brothers, the persecuted people, to a persecutor, and on the other hand said, okay, we will incentivize the return of Syrian brothers because of the rising, let's say, displeasure in the society, widespread speaking in society, and it had to let's say address those.
I like your displeasure, like the choose of the terms, like.
Well, because there is hatred among certain constituencies, but there are nuances, in the feelings towards Syrians. Not all of them are monolithic, and at the same time, you have to remember, like Turkey underwent through extraordinary things. Like we always talk about 2015 and 2016 as a turning point, but we don't talk about the coup attempt, in Turkey. And in my opinion, it has been the most consequential shock. And that's the period, that's the point where Turkey, in my note, I said, I believe Turkey's policy conduct towards Syria has been let's say dominated by tereddüt, hesitancy. It was always between two competing concerns. It didn't have the capacity. It didn't have the let's say act on its let's say calculations. But at the same time, it had to. And 2016 is the point after which you see active military operations after taking care of certain things.
Yeah, the attempted coup was like more of a transformational moment in Turkish foreign policy, I think, and also internal dynamics.
Can I say, just jump on that? What's really interesting about that, and I don't disagree at all, what's really interesting is that Turkey's position towards Syria after 2016 becomes somewhat paradoxical, because it actually it pursues less ambitious policies through more ambitious measures. So it stops trying to overthrow Assad, but the policy it pursues actually entails sending its military into Syria, which is paradoxical. But prior to that point, its goal is theoretically to overthrow a neighbour state, which is a massive policy. When it stops doing that, in order to try to contain the fallout of the war, it actually sends its own military into Syria directly, and in 2020...
influencing the change and the the restructuring of the Syrian National Army, some of the armed groups. So,
and directly fighting Assad's forces for the first time in 2020, during Operation Spring Shield. It's at a point when they're not actually trying to overthrow the regime. Sorry.
Sorry, because without mentioning this, the answer to your question would be quite lacking. The shift is also a political one. Yes, there is a reconciliation of foreign policy and domestic discourse. Yes, the transformation happens, even in Erdogan's policy making or even in Erdogan's politics. I talked about the structural reasons why, parliamentary system to presidential system. But at the same time, we have to remember that now Erdogan, his AK Party, is in alliance with Nationalist Movement Party, MHP. It's a nationalist party, and I think it was part of a regional, let's say, reading. The turning point actually, yes, for Syria it starts with 2015 and 2016, but regionally speaking, the turning point is 2013, when the counter-revolutionary forces embark on rolling back all the gains of revolutionary forces. First, you have the coup in Egypt, and then you have other attempts in Libya, for example. In Syria, you see some dismantlement of certain armed groups by their patrons themselves. And it was a matter of survival for Erdogan, because Erdogan saw that there is no place, there is no future for Islamically oriented actors in the Middle East. Whoever that was behind the counter-revolutionary moment in the Middle East, Emirates, Israel, probably in a more shy way, probably the United States. But it was obvious that there was no room, anyone who is coming from an Islamist background. So Islamist politics had to stop at that point. And Erdogan just made a, let's say, modification in his political orientation, and he leaned on more, and he actually pivoted more towards nationalism, maybe blended its Islamic identity with nationalism. But
we are talking about the macro level here. But what's in terms? I mean, I was not expecting myself to ask that question, but now you've intrigued me. And to the micro ones, in terms of the, like, if in terms of the principal agent theory within Turkey and its agents on the ground in northern Syria, to what extent these armed groups are like more of not Islamic? So
again, I think that is also another let's say reflection of the trend. Around the same time, after 2015 and 2016, the partner forces for Turkey to undertake those Operation Euphrates Shields, Operation Olive Branch in Afrin, and also Peace Spring in eastern bank of Euphrates. The majority of them, of course, you had Islamist movements, groups with Turkey, but they were already transformed in a way. They were also modified in a way, like they were different from 2012, 2013 by 2016. And the ones who lost their patron in the United States, the groups that used to be working with Americans, the chief patron was the United States. They were left without a patron, and Turkey recruited, let's say, in a way, these groups. And in the new, let's say, ideology by 2016 of the state, by the way, after the coup, after the new, let's say, chapter in Turkish state and politics, these forces whose ideology was much more diluted than Islamist groups were much more favorable for the new alliance in the new Turkish state. So for Erdogan's new partners, for example, you have the Turkish armed forces. We're talking about institutions there. You have the intelligence, and you have other bureaucratic institutions. Their identity and their worldview was much more favorable to those less Islamists.
okay.
And there was a greater emphasis on Turkmen, let's say, Turkmen, let's say, aspect in the new say partner forces in northern Syria, and I think the timing quite coincide with one another.
So I want to add to that, and I don't disagree with that framing of it. I think there's also something else that's happening, which is actually Turkey learning from its mistakes, and actually its policy, and this is one thing we sort of forget when we look about international politics, is we kind of presume that actors know what they're doing, and most of the time they don't, and they have to basically learn on the job, and a good leader or a good government is one that actually learns from their mistakes and corrects them. And the first period we're talking about, post 2011, both in Syria and in the wider Middle East, Turkey very much actually has a kind of a hands-off approach. It's much more kind of like, we will give you money, we will give you support, but we're not going to be directly involved. So we're not actually going to go into Syria. We're not going to go into Egypt or anything like that. We're going to offer support, and it doesn't work. It fails. It hugely fails. And actually, Turkey's policy in Egypt is, like I say, 2013 is a key point where, in many ways, Turkey gets, gazumped, it gets trumped. It basically gets, right, the UAE and Saudi put more money on the table,
exactly.
and Turkey gets, sort of pushed out.
Yeah.
And, to an extent, that kind of happens in Syria as well, when Russia comes in, and it's like, okay, we're actually putting ourselves down here. What are you going to do? What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is Turkey then learns from that and becomes more directly involved, not only in terms of its own troops going in Syria, but also, as you say, forming these groups and training them themselves and salarying them, which is a real shift, because for years, 2012 to sort of 2015, they've been entertaining like Ahrar al-Sham and all these different groups to, this is the next, the next big militia, and they all fail and don't succeed. Yeah. And actually, in essence, they're saying, okay, fine, we're gonna have to do it ourselves. And they end up doing the same in Idlib as well. Like, they actually go into Idlib, they set up these security posts. They have much closer relations with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham than I think they'd actually want, because they just don't trust that, without that kind of direct guidance, they can do it. But what's really interesting is this isn't just in Syria. They then start sending troops out to Libya, and sending mercenaries out to Azerbaijan. Yeah. Like, this is a conscious effort by the Turkish state to say, okay, we want to sort of have a foreign policy that is interventionist, but we actually don't back the proxies to do the job properly themselves. We're going to have to send our own people over, which is a real shift. Yeah. And I think it's one that is learnt from the failures of the early years of the Arab Spring. But that's not to disagree that actually all those shifts in domestic politics have actually facilitated that as well, to allow for that.
Yeah. Now, I want to kind of move to our third group of questions that more of, it's obvious that we have an entrenched, complex, multi-dimensional conflict as the Syrian one, and we are surrounded, or more of the hegemony of a multipolar system, the Russian war on Ukraine, the Israel war on Gaza now, and that brings within that entrenched, complex situation. And I think now, coming from an IR perspective, both from Chris and Bilgahan, I do wonder, because I always talk about positionality and Syrian's agency, how can we hijack that web mix, entrenched politics, such as the regional rivalry? And I wanted to come into the the Iranian, Saudi Arabia, we didn't have time for that, but taking into consideration all these kind of regional rivalry, but at the same time, it's intersectional as well, how they play and then display this and then play this. So there is a shift, and with more of a multipolarity that is more perpetuated. The more it's perpetuated, the more is the bargain for Syrians become less and less. And I'm talking here about the negotiation, if we reach the negotiation levels. What's left for Syrians to negotiate for in such a situation where regional rivalry and international dynamics manifest itself to the extent that we don't have any avenues left out, if there is any avenue?
I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but it's hard not to be. I think that your description of the situation is absolutely accurate. We in international relations we speak of three levels. We speak of the local level, the regional level, and the international level. And the Syrian uprising, unfortunately, occurred at a time of quite intense rivalry at both an international and a regional level, which meant that and Syria wasn't unique, it's happened in Libya, it happened in Yemen as well, but it meant that when an internal divisions, and that's what they were in Syria, that's the only way of really describing it. It wasn't simply the case of an autocratic regime that had no support whatsoever. There clearly was some support on the ground, otherwise it would have been overthrown. There was a sizable number of people that opposed it and a sizable number of people that at least weren't willing to fight against it, might be a better way of putting it. But because that didn't exist in a vacuum, because those regional and international players looked at that conflict and thought, I'm going to try to manipulate that in my favor, then the conflict got internationalized. And the problem is, with long-running civil wars like Syria, or long-running conflicts like that, those interventions become so, they penetrate so deep into society that it becomes a way of life. I mean, there's been a conflict, the Iranians and the Russians, for example, in regime-held Syria, are far more entrenched than, I mean, actually, prior to 2011, actually, they weren't very entrenched at all. Like, you know, you had this tiny little base in Tartus that the Russians had, and that was it. There wasn't really much of an Iranian presence other than kind of like, you know, religious institutions and so on, but there certainly wasn't a military presence. There wasn't much of an economic presence. In fact, Syria barely traded with Iran, and now, you know, Iran's a really important trade partner of Syria. It's like, you know, and they own chunks of the economy, as does Russia. So even there, it's really hard to see a situation whereby, even within regime-controlled Syria, those Syrians could, if they wanted to, change that situation, especially given also, of course, the ruling regime have, you know,
this way the
relied
protest,
upon
like,
them, yeah.
maybe.
Well, again,
Like, I mean,
so I mean, again, and I don't want to be too pessimistic, but you know, you know, in some ways, it's history repeating itself. You know, it's you know. So the Sweden protest. Let's take things to the next level. The Sweden protests are rising up, and how does that turn into regime change?
Yeah, of course.
You have to have
agree.
someone that's willing to topple the regime, and no external power is willing to do that, as we've seen over the last 12 years. And the internal, you know, kind of rulers, the sort of cabal around Assad, like the military and so on, have also had 12 years to overthrow him and haven't done so. So I might be completely wrong, and in many ways I wish I am, but like, you know, history has suggested that a protest in Sweden, no matter how inspiring it is not going to lead to...
This brings me
regime
just
change.
to one final question on de-escalation, conflict management, and conflict resolution. 3 terms that I hate the most in international relations.
In which case, I'm going to have those.
Yeah, so we are more
The
of
most
locked
haters.
into these 3 terms, where as if telling the people there is nothing you can wait or hope for. So where we are at now, conflict management or a true de-escalation? Maybe Bilgan, like if you talk about northern Syria, and I will end here and open the floor.
Well, I'm not, you know, an expert on conflict resolution, but what we are experiencing for some time, I think, is containment of the conflict. For if I am to talk about Turkey's experience, Turkey updated its policy and conduct to a much more modest and much more limited and minimalist conduct. So that's kind of containment. You're not ambitious anymore. You're not aiming at undermining Assad regime, if not toppling him. You're alone, basically. That's one of the the most important reasons of this update. And the shift from supporting the opposition towards just let's say focusing on preventing YPG to carve out a territorial and geopolitical entity, undermining it, and these kind of moves and policy. This has been the policy, and it has been much more downgraded from the previous one. And I think this is containment.
Yeah,
containment of it.
Until there is a security, more of a like if there is something like more of a security approach, maybe one of the external actors would act.
Yeah, I mean, can I quickly jump on this? Sorry, I wrote an article on this quite recently related to Gaza, which is, of course, Israel attempted conflict management with Gaza, right? And
escalated.
Well, conflict management historically doesn't work. Like, conflicts that stay unresolved can fester and fester and fester. Sometimes, again, I'm going to go back to the example of Azerbaijan, right? Nagorno-Karabakh was a frozen conflict from 1994 until 2020. It's a really long time, but eventually the dynamic shift one way or the other. So that might happen with Syria. Like at this exact moment with my crystal ball, I can't foresee how that would shift. But historically, because conflict management and, say, containment has a time limit.
Exactly.
At some point, something we can't see right now will change. And interestingly, you mentioned the Ukraine war. A lot of people presumed that actually that would...
after a few months.
Well, no, I was going to say actually it would weaken Russia's position in Syria. Because actually, like, you know, they're putting all their eggs in the Ukraine basket. But actually... Russia doesn't have much of a security presence in Syria. It's mostly a very small air force because, of course, Assad's opponents don't have an air force, so that's all you need. But let's say something big like Putin being toppled as a consequence of the Ukraine war, that would have a big effect, I think, on Russia's presence in Syria. So some of these things that maybe we can't see, you know,
in terms of the prospective scenarios and how we can,
exactly.
Thank you very much, Bilgehan and Chris, for this. Now I have to open the floor for questions. اوكي اتفضل فيك تقول بالعربي انا رح ترجم
شكرا
Thank you so much for this great value presentation and this great reading, Mr. Christopher and Bilgehan and Ms. Rahaf. Actually, that this subject is very, like, you know, conflict, and we cannot actually, you know, contain that. I'm as a doctor, I'm actually, you know, I have international media and also a professor in international policy. I have a high, you know, level of like certificates, and also I am also working in TV channels.
Dr. Ayman, he's a professor or has a PhD in media studies or law, I think, and another PhD in law as well. And he's also a TV presenter.
رحلة عمل ما بين العراق وسوريا.
And also there was, like, you know, I was in Syria and Lebanon and Egypt and in Turkey, and also I was inside the conflict. I'm also a writer to Al Jazeera TV channel.
مهم جدا.
It is very important that we ask this question because I do have experience in that. Can you hear me? Translation, can you hear the translation, please? Can you hear? Thank you so much for your presentations, and Mr. Christopher and Mr. Bilgehan on this great presentation. I'm Ayman Khalid. I'm specialized in media, and also I have PhD, international, also policy, and I work in a TV channel in Iraq, and I'm the first one who talked about the invasion of the United States to Iraq. I worked in the media in Saudi Arabia, and also I was a correspondent in Syria for the before that revolution. I had so many studies. I just would like to let you know that the question is indicated into important point. That's when the Iraq was invaded, the war between Iraq and the United States. The United States, they are the one who representing the other sides. We don't hear about anybody else, only Iraq and the U.S. I was in Egypt at that time during the revolution, and also Egyptian, they went out, revolutions and elections that brought Mohammed Morsi. It was a coup, and also the conflict at that time was very clear. It was very limited. Maybe it was some Iranian interference, but this is actually goes to all the files, all the cases and issues in the region that has so many tools tools of the conflicts and the sides of conflicts. The questions here, why Syria become in this, interference for the United States, and I know there is a great, discussion. Why Syria? Why the interference, the big interference of U.S., the number of actors in Syria? It's never happened in history. There were not any country that all those actors, that two superpowers, Russia and Iran and Turkey and the U.S., they all interfered. The KSA, because they are an Arab, regime, also Egypt also. So there isn't interference that there's militias. There is a great war of terrorism. Why this is actually Syrian case different on any other cases of conflicts?
The
Yes.
exceptionality of are we too exceptional in terms of the Syrian conflict? I will take another 3 questions perhaps. Yeah. تفضل.
Thank you so much. We thanks the Center of Harmon for Contemporary Studies and Mr. Belgehan Öztürk of this great discussions. I have 2 questions. The first question, I would like to say that why the Eastern European countries after the fall of Russian or until the revolution in Georgia, the Orange Revolutions, the whole world was liking that and it transferred from communist into democracy. Why we see the Arab Spring and we see that to transfer these revolutions into either military or transfer it into against not to have democracy? Why this area? Why this region not to be transferred or doesn't have any democratic system? Is it because of the inclusive systems with the United States polar in the opposite of what happened in the Eastern European countries? My question to Professor Belgehan on the Turkey issue, Turkey case here, I just would like to verify, is that when the fall of the Russian airplane was a turning point of the meeting of St. Petersburg, and we saw there is some cutting of the Russian policy between Turkey or Russia, because of the economic, or because of the Arab Spring, or because of the the fall of the Russian airplane, the meeting of Petersburg, and what's happened in Asitana. Yes, thank you for that. Do you have any other questions? Yes, go ahead, please. Thank you so much for this great, meeting. I would like first to ask Ms. Dolly that when she presented first, she talked about the negativity that of the Syrian issue. We are all Syrians. And we suffered a lot from the regime, and this thing that can be unknown. This is a problem. This is going to affect, on our mind. This is an ethical issue. If we are as a revolutionists, we did any wrong, so we cannot accept any injustice. My question to Mr. Christopher also, that he said the conflict, the internal conflict, we cannot. It depends on. He said that this is an external, power conflict. If it is an external power conflict, so why this conflict happened, or maybe let's say it was exploded inside Syria? Are there any external actors? They bribe the Syrian society to feel the suffering and the conflict that it's been applied on. There is no studies related to international relations, any importance to this factor, not because it's the reason of the problems, big problems on the regional level and their role to solve the problems. Is this meant by Mr. Christopher to say that if you don't, comply to the imperialism, interest, you are not going to do any changes inside Syria? No. I have to stop you. I will read it. I will read it to you. Maybe the translation, it was that. I don't know. Like maybe it was that. I don't know. I will read it to you. But
I agree with you. Yes, all the time. Yeah.
السؤال الثالث.
The third question here, the third question to Mr. Gulbahan. You mentioned that the changes after 2016 was the result of the COP and the Arab interference, that it was varieties and they couldn't have any solutions in Syria. And you mentioned the interference of KSA and Emirates and Israel and other countries. And also, you didn't mention to the role of the Russian interference and to what extent that Russian interference. So they felt that after the COP in Turkey, that their interests are threatened in Syria by the U.S. in first place, and therefore they have to do a contain of the existence of the U.S. inside Syria. And you mentioned also, or indicated to important point in the third type of a question, to adopt, for example, Turkey and their future policies on the Turkmen role. What do you mean by the Turkmen role, and how this will be worked? Thank you.
I will give the floor now to Chris and Belgahan, perhaps 1 minute each, and let me take more questions.
Okay,
because I'm sure.
Right, I'm going to try to answer all three questions that were addressed to me in reverse order, if that's okay. So, sorry, the gentleman over there. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. Sorry, sir, Masmek. Safwan. Thank you very much for your point. I hope I didn't come across as suggesting what I think you thought I was suggesting in terms of complying to sort of certain imperialist norms. What I think I was trying to say about the outbreak of the conflict in Syria domestically was that, firstly, I completely agree. Obviously, I cannot possibly imagine as a Brit what Syrians have been through over the last 12 years. I lived in Syria for 2 years, but I was heartbroken, and I only lived in Syria for 2 years. So it wasn't my country that was exploding the way it did. So I can't possibly imagine what you've all been through, and I don't for a moment think to speak for you in any way. As much as possible, I try to sort of analyse the international currents and explain what I see is happening. When it comes to what happened in Syria, my belief is that actually there's nothing particularly unique about Syrian society. A lot of scholars will say, oh, it's something about
tribals,
tribe and ethnicity
sects,
and sectarianism and sex and this kind of thing. I actually think that most societies have within them an inherent fragility. You've seen it in the West recently. You've seen the division over Donald Trump, for example. You look at sort of how US actors, so US domestic players, are spilling out a lot of hatred towards one another over the issue of Donald Trump. In my country, we had a very divisive debate over whether or not to leave the European Union. The difference between those divisions in the UK and the US and divisions in Syria is that in the US and the UK, one side isn't going around killing people. And that changes the dynamics on the ground.
You mean Assad regime?
As in Assad, yes. As in what I'm saying is that sort of Trump supporters aren't going around, Donald Trump, let's say, isn't sort of sending tanks into Chicago, which is the equivalent of what happened in Syria. Now, linking in with the gentleman next to you's question, the other really big difference is that when one of those actors acts in a violent way on a domestic dispute, you don't have, again, in the US and the UK at the moment, external actors encouraging those internal players to act in a violent way. And that's what you have in Syria. So in the Syria conflict, you have Assad's allies, Russia and Iran, encouraging Assad to act in a violent way. When the opposition take up arms, whether it's right or wrong, it's a different question. But what is actually happening is you have external actors encouraging those rebel militia to act in a violent way by providing them with weapons and arms, and that is why you get a violent conflict. So that's the dynamics of what's happening. I believe, because I'm an international relations scholar, that actually those external dynamics are really important. And I love that you put that parallel with Eastern Europe in 1989. When you have that domestic rebellion against communist forces in 1989, not only does the Soviet Union not support the existing regimes, okay, so they don't have that support to be violent against protesters, but the outside world, so the West in that context, actively encourages them through economic means to democratize and pursue liberal capitalism. So most of those states are now members of NATO and members of the EU. That is an active effort by Western states to encourage a particular form of government. In the Arab Spring, you do not have that. In the Arab Spring, you do not have the EU or the West or the US saying to Tunisia or Egypt, if you guys pursue a democratic path, we will invest in your economy, we will support you. They don't do that at all. And in fact, you get the opposite, because as was mentioned earlier, you get a counter-revolutionary set of actors led by the UAE, by Saudi Arabia, that are actively discouraging that. Okay? So those outside actors do affect the choices that the internal players have, and I think that's really important. And that goes back, sorry, to the final question over here, sorry, about why Syria. And I think actually, for me, those external dynamics are really important as to why a domestic dispute, and again, that's not to take away the agency of the local actors, because again, I always make the comparison with Jordan. Jordan gets protests in 2011 as well, in early 2011, and King Abdullah, who has his flaws, and I'm not putting him up as this kind of paragon of, but he instructs the police in March 2011 to hand out juice cartons and bottles of water to protesters to say, look, isn't Jordan great? You can protest here. Bashar instructs his security forces to shoot people. That's a choice, right? So actually the agency of the actors does have an effect. The final point I want to make, I really like that you mentioned the Iraq War, 2003, because actually I would argue that the regional context in which all of this is taking place is so heavily affected by what happens in 2003 in Iraq. In fact, I again, read my book. In the first chapter, I make a big point about how, had that not happened, the Syria uprising might have gone very differently. There's several things that happen. Number one, Iran is massively empowered by the 2003 Iraq War. Okay, so suddenly it begins to see its ability to intervene in Syria is huge, and also it wants to protect its gains. So it really doesn't want to, having just gained Iraq as an ally, it doesn't want to lose Syria as an ally. The US's global position has been weakened by the Iraq War. The US public is not keen on intervention anymore. And actually, when if it hadn't been for Iraq, it's perfectly possible that a US government might have been willing to intervene against Assad. But actually, the public are like, we don't want to do this. You think about in the British Parliament in 2013. When they were voting whether or not to join Obama's strikes about the chemical weapons in Ghouta, all of the British MPs were saying, this is another Iraq, we don't want to take part in it. So Iraq had a lasting effect. And the two other things that Iraq did was it brought jihadism onto Syria's doorstep. Prior to the US invasion of 2003, there was no Al-Qaeda in Balad al-Sham, or at least there was tiny numbers, right? The Iraq War creates what becomes ISIS. And what becomes Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, right? Jabhat al-Nusra, all come from the Iraq War. And I would also add, I think the sectarianism factor gets massively amplified. Again, people are, Syrians here, so I can't really speak for this, but I remember living in Damascus in 2008 and people being really concerned by the sectarian violence that was taking place in Iraq, and that heightens people's awareness of that kind of issue.
Jordan, by
yeah,
the way,
exactly,
yes.
in Jordan.
Yeah.
And I think that it means that when militias form, you're more likely to get those actors that are acting in a sectarian way, in a way that didn't happen before. So Iraq is very important. Sorry.
Okay. Fergan?
Okay, I'll do my best to finish this in the limited time. So I want to start with the first question, which was answered last by Chris, why Syria is this different from previous conflicts in terms of its internationalization, two superpower at the same time intervening. I explain many things with one phenomenon, which is United States strategic doubling down, not doubling down, withdrawing from the Middle East, and in other way pivoting to Asia, Asia Pacific, which was announced by Obama administration, but despite all the differences between them, Trump continued this, and despite all the difference between Trump and Biden, Biden continued this same strategic orientation of the United States. What made Syria a theater of many actors intervening was the hands-off approach of the Americans. This is one of the main reasons why Turkey is so angry with the United States, because we entered this together. And then they left Turkey on its own, cutting back the support, and they said we're not interested in opposition anymore. We just want to contain. We just want to fight against Daesh, and we want to fight with partner forces, which is YPG and so on. So, what again, in addition to what Christopher said, the American public and the Americans are traumatized about Iraqi experience. They don't want any more of this. So that's why the hands-off approach in the first place, and that's why a new tactic working with partner forces instead of boots on the ground. So in my view, that is what's made Russians, for example, that much assertive in this region. Of course, I heard from experiences from politicians who said that Gulf states were really influential in inviting or pressuring Russia to intervene in Syria to balance Iranian influence. But again, even without this, I'm sure Russians would be interested in directly intervening in the vacuum created by the United States. So why Eastern European? There is a difference between the revolutions in Eastern European countries and also the Middle East. I hate to be simplistic or biased, but it seems like what we are in academia, what we are, let's say, hesitant to talk about these biases or simplifications.
No,
they're actually there in the minds of politicians and decision makers. And in my opinion, Middle East, the uniqueness of the Middle East is very entrenched in the minds of Western policymakers.
The
and I think
stereotypical,
and also even this difference is even visible between Israelis and the Americans. When Americans tell Israelis something, Israelis are like, "You're not the ones living here. This is Middle East. This is a peculiar region, and there are rules here to survive." So this kind of attitude coming from Israelis to Americans, and I think why there is a difference between the approach by the Western countries towards revolution in other countries and also the Middle East is this. And you can also see the difference in Ukraine war and also Syrian war. And we even heard European politicians saying that, oh, at least we're getting refugees with blondes, hairs and blue
that
eyes.
Was said to me in
that's the short answer. Of course, there are a lot to unpack that. And everything about any question related to Russia and how Turkey calibrated its relation with Russia has to do with how Turkish relations with America, with the United States. You have to pay really close attention. If the relationship between Turkey and the United States was perfect, you wouldn't see any rapprochement, any cooperation between Turkey and Russia. And when Turkey downed Russian jets, they hurt Turkey very badly. And that is the point when Russians heavily bombarded the road, the connection between Turkey and Aleppo center. And that's when opposition lost Tel Rifat in northern Aleppo, and other trade and economic embargoes. Russia made sure that it really hurt Turkey at that time, and this is the time in 2015 when the conditions were being paid for the coup attempt in 2016. Around 10 bombing attacks happened in Turkey. and the decision among the decision makers, it was really obvious that Americans started to be very hostile towards you, and you know, through their actions in Syria, through their you know, support to YPG, and in short, that's the explanation for me to Russia. And we had a let's say, as Turks, we had a certain experience with Russians, dealing with Russians directly, because we had to deal with on our own. We ask, and that is the reason why we are so badly mad at Americans. We are left alone against Russians, and that's why when you are left alone with a much more, let's say, powerful let's say, actor, you start you know, finding ways to deal with it. You start, like, you know, maybe I should accommodate it, not to you know, attract its rage, and that's the, again, simplest thing.
Thank you very much. The one, okay, on Turkmeni.
Turkmen? Turkmen?
No, there was no questions on the Kurdish.
There was this one mention of Turkmen issue, and I want to clarify it. I don't think there is a specific, let's say, Turkmen agenda of Turkey, because Turkey is all this transformation and process is all about is part of a learning process. You know, Turkey is learning and adopting its policy and conduct accordingly. And even if there were people in the very early years of the uprisings who were thinking about a Turkmen-centric agenda, it was obvious that their demographic, let's say, power, their numbers are really few, and there is no, let's say, sense of distinctiveness among Turkmens, as far as I know, as opposed to Kurdish population. And that's why, of course, the American support is something very important. But even without the American overt support of Kurdish population in Syria, I think the level of awareness about the community's distinctiveness is much higher among Kurds than Turkmens. That's why there will be no, let's say, Turkmen-centric agenda by Turkey. I just mentioned Turkmen fighters within the Syrian National Army as partner forces. It was about increasing the popularity of Syrian National Army fighters domestically in Turkey for the opposition constituencies, not for the government constituencies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Perhaps, I don't think we have time. One last question, Samir. Okay, one last.
Thank you, Christopher Gelberhan. And my question here on the subject of the regional and international actors, there are a willingness to keep Syria scenario to continue for many years coming, and the Ukrainian crisis came, and also the role of the actors has been affected, especially the U.S. But we find out that Ukraine that followed the Syrian scenario and is not the opposite, and scenario is to continue the conflict for a long period of time. Then lately, especially the visit of the regime to China, and they have the economic Indian project, and there is a rejection of Iran and Turkey for the China project, and there is United States also following up with that. And to what extent do you think this economic magnitude, big high level of economy project can affect on the role of the actors inside Syria? China,
or the trade route. To what extent it's gonna? I used 1 year ago. I thought 2 years ago. I thought China is the solution. Perhaps.
Yeah.
Now I've changed my mind.
Very quickly, China hasn't actually really invested in Syria. All it's done is it signed the regime up to the Belt and Road Initiative without actually signing any checks and actually putting any investment in. At the moment, if you look at how China acts even at the best of times, it acts as a savvy investor. It puts money in places where it's going to get a return. Syria is not a good investment at the moment. It's not going to get a good return. So for political reasons, to basically, you know, give the impression that it's this kind of global mediator, global leader, that it's trying to, that yes, getting Syria on board fits with a wider narrative of we talk to anyone, we're you know, getting
and the US,
yeah, exactly, you know, getting the Iranians into the BRICS and things like that. That's part of a wider kind of Chinese political agenda. But economically, until there's stability in Syria, they're not actually that interested. And you know, the regime have been talking about China investing for years, and China still hasn't done so. And I don't see them doing so anytime soon. Plus, of course, China's actually going through a bit of an economic downturn at the moment, you know, and you're going to start seeing even less investment abroad over the next couple of years.
Okay, if you want to add any more, 1 minute.
For Syria, I agree with Chris, but if we talk about the wider geopolitical implications, I think since you mentioned both Turkey and Iran, in the face of the new IMEC project like India Middle East corridor, I think both Iran and Iran has already signed up for Chinese sphere of influence with strategic agreements, but Turkey, I think it's bypassed in this project too. But Turkey is more interested in being a part of Belt and Road initiative of China rather than India Middle East corridor, because in the great scheme of things, this India, Middle East, Europe corridor, which is backed by the United States, strategically speaking, there is no place for Turkey. And for this reason, Turkey wants to balance this with greater, let's say, greater buy-in from the China. And that was a reaction from Turkey, you know, bringing up the development roads, you know, connecting the north and, you know, southern ends of Iraq. And also Turkey is trying to be a part of the middle corridor through Trans-Caucasus railways. So definitely Turkey has that appetite. And about China, I think, yes, until now they have always been interested in or limited their conduct to economic activities. But with the mediation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, they show that they are now interested in political maneuvers too. And Israel-Palestine conflict at the moment is offering an opportunity for China in the light of how United States conduct has been received poorly, you know, especially in the Middle East. And I think this is a great opportunity to seize for China. We're yet to see to what extent they will capitalize on this, but it's a fact that there's a great opportunity for this.
Many thanks, Bilgehan. Ladies and gentlemen, let's together just give an applause for our two great speakers today, and thank you for your attendance and your patience and for the talk. Thank you.